You wake up with a decent erection, maybe even a strong one. But by evening, when you actually want to be intimate, getting one becomes difficult or impossible. This pattern repeats daily. Morning function feels almost normal. Evening function is severely compromised. And you've probably assumed this is about energy levels, or stress from the day, or just how your body works now. But what's actually happening is that your prostate undergoes a predictable inflammation cycle every 24 hours, swelling progressively throughout the day and creating increasing vascular compression that destroys erectile function by evening. Here's the mechanism creating this daily pattern. Inflammation in any tissue follows circadian rhythms influenced by hormones, activity levels, and metabolic processes. When you sleep, your body enters a state where cortisol levels are lower, inflammatory signaling quiets, and anti-inflammatory repair processes dominate. During those nighttime hours, inflammation in your prostate tissue decreases somewhat. Swelling reduces slightly, the compression on blood vessels eases, and by morning, vascular capacity is at its daily maximum. That's why morning erections happen, or why morning function is better. It's not random, it's the lowest inflammation point in your 24-hour cycle. But as soon as you wake up and start your day, the inflammatory cycle reverses. Activity increases cortisol. Sitting creates pelvic pressure. Stress throughout the day elevates inflammatory markers. Diet introduces inflammatory triggers. And hour by hour, inflammation in your prostate tissue intensifies. The tissue swells progressively. Compression on blood vessels increases steadily. And by evening, after 12 to 16 hours of accumulating inflammation, the vascular restriction has become severe enough that erectile function fails completely or requires maximum effort for minimal result. Think of it like a balloon slowly inflating inside a closed box. At 6 in the morning, the balloon is somewhat deflated. There's space for everything else in the box. By noon, it's half inflated, starting to press against the sides. By 6 in the evening, it's fully inflated. Everything else in the box is compressed against the walls. Your prostate is that balloon. The blood vessels are what's getting crushed against the walls. And the inflation happens on a predictable daily schedule, driven by your body's inflammatory rhythms. This explains why evening intimacy becomes impossible, even though morning function suggests everything works. You're not comparing apples to apples. Morning you has 12 hours of anti-inflammatory sleep repair and minimal prostate swelling. Evening you has accumulated 16 hours of inflammatory buildup and maximum prostate enlargement. The vascular capacity that exists in the morning is completely gone by evening because the compression has intensified dramatically throughout the day. The psychological impact of this pattern is particularly cruel. You know your body can function because mornings prove it. So when evening comes and function fails, it feels like a personal failure rather than a mechanical problem. You think maybe you're not attracted enough, or stressed too much, or doing something wrong. Your partner might think you're making excuses when you say you're too tired. Because if desire was real, wouldn't your body respond? Neither of you realizes that 12 hours of inflammatory buildup has physically crushed the blood vessels needed for function. This helps explain the daily variability you're experiencing. It's educational information about circadian inflammation patterns, not medical diagnosis, but understanding this cycle can inform better health decisions. Most men dealing with this pattern try timing solutions that don't address the underlying inflammation. They attempt intimacy earlier in the day when function is better. That might work temporarily, but it's adapting to dysfunction, rather than addressing what's causing it. Some try medications in the evening thinking they'll overcome the problem. And medications can help by forcing vasodilation despite compression, but they're not reducing the inflammatory buildup. They're compensating for it. And as the underlying cycle continues intensifying month after month, even medications become less effective at overcoming the evening compression. Here's the trajectory if this inflammatory cycle continues unchecked. What currently affects only evening function starts affecting afternoon function. The window of decent function shrinks from morning hours to only the first hour or two after waking. Eventually, even morning function becomes compromised because the overnight anti-inflammatory repair can't fully reverse the cumulative damage anymore. You progress from having a few hours of decent function to having almost no reliable function at any time of day. So what interrupts this daily inflammatory cycle? The only approach that works is comprehensively reducing the baseline inflammation in prostate tissue that creates the cycle in the first place. When chronic inflammation is addressed at the cellular level, the daily swelling pattern becomes less extreme. The morning to evening variation decreases. The prostate doesn't swell as dramatically throughout the day because the underlying inflammation driving that swelling has been reduced. Vascular compression stays more consistent at lower levels instead of progressing from moderate in the morning to severe by evening. Most men who address prostate inflammation properly notice the daily variation pattern, changing in recognizable stages. The first shift typically appears around week 6 to 8, as baseline inflammation starts decreasing. The difference between morning and evening function becomes less extreme. Morning function that was good becomes slightly better. Evening function that was poor becomes less poor. The gap narrows. By week 12 to 16, many men report that evening function has improved to where it approaches what morning function used to be. The daily cycle hasn't disappeared completely. Some variation remains because inflammatory rhythms are natural, but the extreme swing from functional to dysfunctional has moderated substantially. This requires comprehensive anti-inflammatory support that works throughout the entire 24-hour cycle. Natural compounds that reduce inflammation in prostate tissue so baseline swelling decreases. Ingredients that modulate inflammatory signaling throughout the day. Support for cortisol regulation, so stress doesn't spike inflammation as dramatically. Antioxidants that protect tissue from inflammatory damage accumulating hour by hour. When all of these work together, you're not just treating symptoms at one time of day. You're reducing the inflammatory cycle, creating the entire daily pattern. Expectations need to be realistic. This won't make morning and evening function identical. Some natural variation exists even in healthy men. But reducing the extreme swing from adequate function in the morning to failed function by evening makes intimacy possible regardless of time of day. You stop being limited to specific hours when inflammation happens to be at its lowest point. In the description, there's information about a comprehensive approach designed to reduce the inflammatory cycle, causing daily variation in erectile function. When baseline prostate inflammation decreases, the morning to evening swing typically moderates substantially over 8 to 12 weeks. Do you notice a pattern where function is better in the morning and worse by evening?